Thank you for being here this morning. I am House Minority Leader Lisa Damath, and today we have two bills up on the House floor. The first, we don't know the order, but we'll have the HHS bill up and then public safety. These are both controversial and consequential bills for the state. And this will probably highlight the Democrats' misplaced priorities. We're going to touch on Human Services Bill during this press conference with you, but what is shocking as we've looked over the bill is the lack of funding for nursing homes. The DFL is claiming that they are giving nursing homes the largest amount of funding in state history, but of their $72 billion budget, only 0.01 is actually going to nursing homes. So it sounds to me more of an uninvestment or an underinvestment. As we are looking at that long-term crisis with our nursing homes across the state, this neglect from the Democrats to support our seniors is inexplicable. And we have talked about this since we first came into session, the need to fund our nursing homes. Next, we'll be hearing the public safety omnibus package. And as our Senate colleagues coined it last week, this bill is the get out of jail free card for violent criminals. We have historic rates of violent crime right now in our state. And putting criminals over the safety of Minnesotans is a horrible policy that can't be explained. Minnesotans have the right to feel safe in their communities. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Ann New Brindley to talk more about the HHS bill.
Good morning. It's so nice that the podium is low now. I always had to crank that thing down. Again, I'm Representative Ann New Brindley. I represent most of Chisago County. I also serve as the Republican lead on the Human Services Finance Committee. So that's the bill we'll be hearing today. What you'll find is that, well, yes, there are some provisions we don't particularly like in the Human Services bill. Republicans are not voting no on this bill today because of what's in it. We're voting no on this bill today because of what's not in it. We are voting no because there is almost no funding for nursing homes, and with an $18 billion surplus, the DFL managed to find a whopping $3.9 million for our nursing homes. Now, you will hear, and Representative Leader Damath quoted this or mentioned this, but the Democrat majority in the House tweeted last week, quote, "The House DFL majority is funding nursing homes with the largest amount of funding they've received in history." And this is patently false. This is patently false. They are giving nursing homes $3.9 million. Now, what you will hear today is that there is this historic funding because of forecasted spending. There's about $850 million in forecasted spending for our nursing homes. However, I want to make 2 points about this. Number one is that nursing homes, while that is forecasted, that is not likely what they will actually receive. They will likely receive a much smaller number than that, as is historically true. But number two, I would point out that, we heard the education omnibus bill last week. There is a $1.1 billion forecasted increase in education, and yet no one in this state and no one in that House chamber would ever believe that that was sufficient funding for education, because it's not. Simply going with that forecasted funding is not sufficient to deal with the crisis that our nursing homes are facing. And again, this is not a looming crisis. This is an immediate crisis. It is happening right now. Nursing homes have been closing, nursing homes are closing, and nursing homes will be closing. And I would just direct you all to the editorial from the Star Tribune editorial board. I believe it was just over the weekend. And I just want to read one thing. It says, "These facilities are now facing an existential threat from financial headwinds, and Minnesota lawmakers need to take heed and act swiftly. Specifically, a robust short-term aid package this session would be a priority priority to help these facilities weather post-pandemic staffing challenges and inflation. Also in order, scrutiny of whether the state's pioneering 2015 nursing home reimbursement reform needs refining. And I assure you that it does. Our nursing homes are in critical need, and we have a real opportunity with this budget surplus to fill that need. And I hope that our Democrat colleagues will see the light today. I am not convinced that that will happen. With that, I will turn the time over to my colleague, Representative Paul Novotny, to talk about public safety.
Thank you. As Representative New Brindley said, I'm Paul Novotny. I represent Elk River and now then Oak Grove and Otsego and 30B. I'm the GOP lead for public safety. In discussing the public safety omnibus bill that we'll be hearing today, it's become obvious that public safety is not the focus of the omnibus bill. What it does is, like the Senate pointed out, it's the get out of jail free card. The public safety bill makes thousands of incarcerated felons eligible for early release, reduces sentences for violent offenders, and provides over $100 million to nonprofits with little accountability. The bill ignores the needs of law enforcement officers across the state, and it fails to hold judges and prosecutors accountable for light or no sentences. This bill prioritizes criminals ahead of everyday Minnesotans. This bill puts felons back on the street by allowing criminals to serve over half of their prison sentence or probation if they complete programming. This bill includes violent criminals, including manslaughter, rape, kidnapping, assault, or domestic assault. Limiting time for persons with violent criminal histories puts the rest of Minnesotans at risk. Democrats are choosing to invest $100 million in unproven nonprofits with little accountability on how the money is spent. This funding should go toward law enforcement and not necessarily for extra officers, but through law enforcement who has the street knowledge of what's going on and would know which of these organizations can best use the money. And if it's not being spent correctly or they're not receiving the services that they are paying for, that they would be able to change that funding. We've got universal background checks coming that ignores the root cause of the crime. This proposal in this omnibus bill creates strict and impractical hurdles for law-abiding Minnesota citizens who want to exercise their Second Amendment rights. We're going to have amendments that will increase the penalties for people who violate the transfer laws and knowingly transfer firearms to people who shouldn't possess them. We're going to strengthen that. We're going to have a focus on people abiding by the laws that we already have and encouraging prosecutors to follow the letter of the law. On the extreme risk order protection, the proposal violates due process and does not address the alleged safety risk, the individual. If someone is a legitimate threat to themselves or others, simply seizing the firearms will not prevent the individual from being a harm to themselves or others through other means. The seizure of property without a warrant and due process, especially property that is protected by the Second Amendment, violates civil rights. Our efforts should be focused on providing support and care to those in crisis. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Representative Peggy Scott.
Good morning. I'm Representative Peggy Scott. I'm from Andover, and I represent the northern parts of Anoka County and one township in Isanti County. And I'm just going to briefly address the primary issue that we have with the judiciary policy bill today, and that is the significant increase in funding to the Department of Human Rights. They are getting a 56% increase in their funding. That is equivalent, and that includes the equivalent of almost 27 new FTEs. And what they plan to do with that, in my opinion and in our caucus's opinion, is weaponize government. That what they will be doing is going after employers, housing providers, educational institutions, and other entities subject to the Human Rights Act. We heard in committee that the Human Rights Department was bringing this language regarding the crimes of hate and bias because of concerns that they were hearing in their communities about incidents related to bias and hate, and that often people do not want to report these incidences to law enforcement. One concern that we have is having government bureaucrats at the Department of Human Rights decide what is or is not a crime of bias or hate. If it's, and that's incidences, I'm sorry, the incidences. If it's not a crime, then what type of incident is it? The language in this bill is very vague, from the terms such as solicit, and not clarifying the type of incidents to be reported, and not putting any checks and balances on free speech protections. So we believe that this is an overreach of government, and it will be used to weaponize government and particularly squelch free speech. And with that, thank you for being here, and we'll take questions.
I know that nursing homes have called for a more immediate funding package rather than just putting additional money into the reimbursement rates. Is that something that you're hoping to address today with amendments or in debate?
So we do have some amendments, and we offered amendments last night as well, for some grant funding that would be immediate for nursing homes, and that would really be for recruitment and retention of employees. So we certainly have some grant funding that way. We also have longer-term structural changes in amendments to provide changes to the rate calculations as well.
What's your sense for how late the debate could go tonight, especially on the public safety bill? I think I counted something like over 20 amendments.
We've got two big bills on the floor today. I wouldn't expect us to be done early.
Representative Bonnie, can you just, if I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly, on the money for nonprofits in the public safety bill, you're all right with that in concept if it goes through the police, that they would sort of be the oversight arm of that sort of money? I just want to make sure I heard you right on that.
Yes, the money is needed. The money is needed in the entire state. That's the other part of the amendment that we are going to be pushing forward, that I believe it was the governor's plan that's more based on population with an extra bump for people that have high crime. But crime throughout the state is a problem. Shortages of peace officers in the state are a problem. You know, even if we gave all this money to, say, for Minneapolis Police Department, they couldn't spend it on the police. They just don't have the manpower. They can't hire the people that they need to fill these roles. Obviously, it'll have to go to these different groups, and we'd like to see that administered at a local level where they are directed and more immediately responsive.
And I was just going to ask about the DFL agenda on guns has shrunk to some degree since the start of the legislative session. Do you all consider that a victory? I mean, can you just talk about that? I know you're not excited about the bills that are in this, but there were certainly more, at least on the table initially, it felt like.
The initial gun package that they had, the anti-Second Amendment package, would have been another example of them trying to criminalize a bunch of law-abiding people that aren't the problem. At the same time, that they are pushing for lessening of crimes penalties, they're trying to make more people into criminals that aren't doing anything wrong and don't have that intent.
Can I add to that? I would suggest it's also an indication of the fact that the Democrats are not together on these gun restriction issues. That the Democrats within their own caucus do not have the support for all of those provisions. There has always been bipartisan opposition to these restrictions, and we'll see what happens today.
Representative Scott, you mentioned that the Department of Human Rights would have enough funding equivalent to 27 FTEs. Does that mean that they have proposed to hire 27 FTEs, or that's enough funding to cover that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. In their budget, in their, the bill that was carried regarding the Department of Human Rights, it's broken down in bits and pieces for whatever program. But it comes to, I think it's 26.75 new FTEs.
And that's primarily for bias training?
A lot of it's for new investigators to investigate all these new things that they're setting up, whether that be this incidences of bias and hate, which will be basically one big database. I mean, someone could go theoretically and say that they felt like there was an incident of bias against them with no proof, and it goes into this database. And my concern is what's that database going to be used for eventually? Are they going to say that this is valid research and that these crimes or these incidences of bias and hate are happening, at exponential levels, when there's really no follow-up to see if there was actually any crime committed? So we have an amendment today that says this stuff has to go to the BCA. They have to parse it out. They have to see if there is any crime to be investigated there. So back to your question, I think around 9 of those FTEs are for investigators, and then the rest is 1 to 2 new FTEs depending on what the new provision is. But as you know, one of the things that they need new investigators for is to investigate housing providers, because you cannot. A housing provider can no longer say no to someone that's on a public assistance program just for that reason. And so they can say no to them for any other reason, but they cannot discriminate based on their income source. And so they are estimating, the department themselves is estimating that that's going to be one of the reasons they need more FTEs is to investigate that new law.
And you would prefer BCA to do that, investigate
Well, I
those?
prefer not to have that policy at all. As a housing provider myself, and having, rented to people on public assistance and people not on public assistance, I just don't think that it's wise to tell people what they can and cannot do with their own property.
Do you start looking ahead to conference committees and potentially winning over senators on some of these proposed changes rather than spending the time in the House?
Certainly, there's always strategy to what we do in the House and via floor amendments. But the reality is, when a bill leaves the House floor, it should be ready to be signed into law. That bill should be ready to go to the governor's desk. That's actually the point of passing legislation off the House floor. And often that does happen, where bills will pass both the House and the Senate at the same time and go directly to the governor's desk. Our belief is that our bills coming off the House floor should be ready to go to the governor's desk. Now, obviously, most of these bills will go into conference committee, and certainly all of us are having conversations with our Senate counterparts to make sure that we can at least restrict the damage that's being done right now to the state of Minnesota.
Kind of a big picture question here for whoever wants to take it. But, we're seeing all these bills where the debate goes late into the night. There's a long list of amendments on that. Are you guys trying to punish the Democrats with this, or is it because they didn't listen to you in committee, or what's happening there?
Well, the punishment is handed out equally for both parties, it seems. We feel that these amendments that we are presenting are legitimate issues within these bills that deserve public discussion. This is the process we signed up for. We're doing our work. We're presenting amendments. These are not frivolous amendments. These are meaningful amendments that we believe would make a difference for Minnesotans if they should be attached to these bills. We want to improve these bills as they head for conference so that we have a good, strong position as conference committees come together. And when finally these bills come back to us for final passage, hopefully they'll be in better shape than when they leave the House floor.
Representative New Brindley, are you going to have an amendment today increasing funding for nursing home grants, or, and like, if so, like, how much would that be? I guess, I know in an ideal world, or how much money do you think nursing homes should be granted at this time?
Yes, we do have money to increase grants to nursing homes, like I said, essentially for recruitment and retention, those kinds of things. And we also have an amendment to actually increase the rate that nursing homes are paid. Now, what is the right number? More than 3.9 million. It's hard to say exactly what the right number is, right? I get it, it's complicated. And I also understand that, you know what? I mean, just like any area of public service, they can always use more. So I understand that. But we really do have a critical need right now. Nursing homes, we've had 15 nursing homes close over the last couple of years. We had 2 close just in the last couple of months. And we have nursing homes closing in areas like Crookston, Minnesota, where there is no other option for miles and miles and miles away. It is breaking up families. It is taking our senior citizens out of their communities. It really is a crisis that we have to deal with. And so we have to give an injection of funding into our nursing homes, or we are going to, like I said, continue to see this crisis accelerate into the future here. And that's what's happening under the Democrat bill.
Any final questions on today's bills?
Are you all getting exhausted at all?
Yes, very tired. Very tired, but you know what? It energizes us to do the work. We would have loved to have done this work in committee, but we were shut down. And Republicans were not allowed in committees to do the work that we're sent here to do. And we were told that we didn't get to talk, and we didn't get to allow us to bring forward the things that our constituents cared about. And so unfortunately, that means we've got to do that now. And we are willing to do that. We are willing to do whatever we have to do to support our constituents and to support the people of Minnesota.
I'd add just one more thing. We're not even getting a seat on every conference committee. So we have to do this work on the House floor. It's our last chance to speak to these bills, and we will do it. Thank you.
Thank you all.